On today's crossover edition with Locked On Wild, I share my concerns about the Dallas Stars. No surprise, it's the defense. Seth lets us know how John Hynes may turn things around in Minnesota, and whose young core are you more excited for?
You're Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. I'm Joey Erickson, former producer of 105 Through the Fan. Please be sure to subscribe. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making us a part of your day and making us your first listen. Welcome to another crossover edition of Locked On Stars and Locked On Wild. Always a good time to meet with our good buddy Seth, a fellow St. Cloud State Husky. So always a great time to catch up with him. And we had an absolute blast once again. I tell him some of my concerns about the Stars. He lets us know how Minnesota may turn things around this season. Plus, whose young core are you more excited for? The Wild have a sneaky good young prospect pool that we get into on today's episode as well. Don't want to keep you guys any longer. Please hit the subscribe button. We're almost to 2,500 subscribers. Drop a like, drop a comment below. Let Seth and I know how excited you are for hockey season, which is right around the corner. Meaningful hockey, I should say, is just 7 days away. Can you believe it? Stars versus Nashville. Anyways, without further ado, a crossover edition, Locked On Stars and Locked On Wild.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into a special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that subscription button on YouTube and your favorite audio platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes, because guess what? The season is right around the corner. Today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you will get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars, Joey Erickson joins as we go toe-to-toe, talking Stars, talking Wild, looking ahead to the season, and some young players that could have a big influence on how both of these teams do this year. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, and joined, as mentioned, by Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars. Joey, it's good to have you back on the show. We've done a couple of these since you hopped on the mic for Locked On Stars, and usually when we do, that means that the season is right around the corner.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be with you, Seth. Hockey season is here. We are about 8 days away from the Stars season opener when we're recording this, so I'm absolutely pumped, and it's just a wonderful time of year. The summer can be a drag sometimes, but now we're off and running again, and I think the Stars only play the Wild 3 times this year, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe that's a good thing for Minnesota. I would love the Stars to meet them a few more times, but it should be such a fantastic season, and feels like the Stars and Wild may be in similar situations from the season ago. So maybe there's going to be a lot of redundancies, but we're going to hash them out today.
We are definitely going to hash them out. And what we should do is the NHL should stop scheduling Central Division opponents multiple times in the preseason and move those games to the regular season. The Wild had 2 against the Stars, and 2 against Chicago. It's like, I've heard rumors that they're going to try to cut the preseason to 4 games. Let's do that against Eastern Conference teams. Just do not care. But let's get those Central Division games back.
Yeah, and see some teams that you don't see all the time, because we play the Blues twice, and we had you guys a couple of times. So I'm all for it. And they always talk about trying to get the rivalries back, but you play more games. Play some more games. It'll allow things to boil over a bit more.
More regular season games, and not that like you play 3 out of 4 games against the same team. Like let's spread these out so that we can let the tension kind of naturally boil as the season goes on. But what do I know? I don't put the schedule together.
Yeah, who cares?
I am curious, Joey, because in just looking at how this Central Division slots out myself, I have Dallas as one of the expected heavyweight hitters at the top, with Colorado, with Nashville, with Winnipeg. I've put kind of a little divider between those four as the top teams in the division. Obviously, Dallas has tremendous offense. They've got great goaltending. What is the one thing that you are most concerned about for the Stars heading into this season?
Yeah, I subscribe to the fact it's going to be Ilya Lyubushkin and Matt Dumba that are sort of slotting into this top 4 role in Dallas. How is that going to work out? And maybe I shouldn't have as many concerns as I do, because if you pair Lyubushkin or Dumba with Miro Heiskanen or Thomas Harley, they should be okay in a lot of ways. They can sort of cover up any of the weaknesses that maybe Dumba and Lyubushkin have in their game, but they do provide physicality and they do provide a little grit on the back end for Dallas. And they give Pete DeBoer a couple of bodies that he can trust, because we all know, as history has repeated itself over the past few seasons, he doesn't have the most amount of trust in Niels Lundqvist, who looks like he's going to be that 6th defenseman. Is he going to hold on to that spot when the year begins? I don't know. We haven't seen it yet, and nothing leads me to believe that Pete DeBoer is going to trust him at all. But with Dumba on your top pair with Miro, it allows Miro to be on his strong side, and we've seen that a couple of times in the preseason. And Miro is a different player, and he's already great. We understand that, but him being on his strong side just opens up so much more for his game offensively, for himself and others. So I am looking forward to seeing Miro and Harley on their strong sides. I know Harley played on his strong side last year with Miro, but they get that lefty-righty matchup, and I think that's going to bode well. But as you mentioned, my concerns are the back end. Like, is Dumba going to elevate his game to be able to play 22 plus minutes a night along with Miro and Lyubushkin? Like, how does that work? And again, it's the same question we had last year. Like, how is this defense going to fare? Because up front, like, we're fine. And maybe the regular season, it doesn't matter. The Stars will just outscore everybody. But in the postseason, when the rink shrinks, and Dallas, the last few years, the offense dries up at some of the most critical times, and they have to be staunch defensively, they haven't been able to get it done. And I don't know if Dumba and Lyubushkin are the answers to getting the Stars over the hump in the grand scheme of things. But you got to play 82 first and get in. And as you mentioned, they have to be one of the favorites in the Central. They want to win it. I mentioned that in our contenders episode with all the other locked on Nashville and Colorado. We did one as you did as well, and I feel like they want to win it.
Yeah.
They make no mistakes about it, even though they can't win game 1 at home under Pete DeBoer. So I feel pretty good about them mostly, and it's kind of weird to be like, yeah, I don't have a lot of concerns about the Stars, and that's the first time we could say that in over the last few years, which is nice.
If you ask me the same question, I would say, how much time do you have? No,
Yeah.
It is funny how, as we do this more, you really hone in on particular areas, and it's amazing how it just seems like it's the same things every season. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure, with the Minnesota Wild as well. But one other area I want to ask you about with this Stars team. Obviously, in the offseason, Joe Pavelski finally hung up his skates. An icon, one of the, an incredibly successful NHLer for a few different franchises, obviously with the Stars here as well. A huge portion of the leadership group for this Dallas Stars team. Now, you can look at the roster and say, okay, we're going to cover the production with X and Y. Some of the guys that we'll talk about when we look at the young players to finish off the show. But how is Dallas going to plug that leadership gap this season? How are they going to be able to offset some of the loss of just ownership of the room that Joe Pavelski brought?
Yeah, it's going to be tough, but the lasting impact Joe had on the organization cannot be understated. And you see it throughout camp and preseason. Who's out there early, working in front of the net, tipping pucks? Wyatt Johnston, Tyler Seguin. Like, he left an impact that will forever hang around here, as long as the players that played with him are going to be Dallas Stars, which is a great thing. But it is going to be tough to lose a guy like that was just so beloved. But I've sort of been knocking on this door now over the last month or so. I think this is Wyatt Johnston's team. I think this is his year where he sort of just grabs the bull by the horns, and he's going to lead by example. And eventually he's going to be the captain, I believe, someday after Jamie Benn exits the picture. And it feels like this could be the last official year of the Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn era. Jamie Benn's in the final year of his contract. General manager Jim Nill came out and said, as long as he's a general manager, Jamie Benn's going to be here. So you can pretty much write it in ink now that Jamie Benn's going to be here next year. But this is like the last official year of them still sort of being integral parts of the offense and still contributing. Now it's this new era of the Johnstons of the world and Stankovens and Robo and Rope. It's time for those guys to step up and start to garner some of that respect in the locker room, which I'm sure they have. But Joe Pavelski, the try to fill the void that Joe Pavelski did. And that's going to be hard because Joe was one individual and he had such a presence. But it is time for even the Miro Heiskins of the world to step up leadership-wise. And he has over the last few years as an assistant captain, and he's a bit more quiet. But I think Wyatt has that moxie, and he's well-liked. And I said this before, the Stars social media team loves him, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I know it's silly, but they use him for stuff because I think he sort of is becoming the face. And we thought that was maybe going to be Robertson after that huge year. But Wyatt, he just has a little bit of it all. And he's good with the media. He has the moxie. He's savvy. I think he's the guy. He's going to start taking over the reins. And I'm excited to watch because he's such a great player.
I love that because it's kind of the same thing that we see here in Minnesota with Brock Faber. Like you would assume, and in a lot of ways he is. Karil Kapriszov is the face of this organization, but the social media team does so much stuff with Brock Faber because he's got that engaging personality and he just is so like a natural at it. And so it's fascinating. And I can't wait to really like dive in because we're going to do like a head to head as to whose young core has the better chance to hit that cup window here for the third segment. But it is fascinating to move from the old guard to the new, and we're seeing a lot of that with both of these teams, I think. So we'll talk way more Minnesota Wild here in segment 2, as I'll let Joey ask some burning questions about this Minnesota Wild team, including how do the Minnesota Wild prevent the Stars from scoring like 90 goals every game? We'll probably talk about that, but we got a lot more coming up on today's crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Stars after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Stars is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You don't have to go to a separate window, a separate tab to find what you're looking for. FanDuel has it all in one place. And best of all, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. Doesn't even have to be a winner. You can win or lose. $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So head to FanDuel.com today to take advantage of this great deal. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars. Once again, we thank you for making both Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out Locked On NHL as we get closer to the start of the season for your second listen, so you don't miss out on any big stories. If you're a fan of the Boston Bruins, you're sweating bullets right now because Jeremy Swayman is unsigned. Boston's claiming goalies. Absolute chaos in the streets in the city of Boston. Oh, boo-hoo for them. They've won.
They need to get it done
titles.
because we need to figure out what we got to pay Otter. So they need to get that done.
Ooh, well, 64 million reasons to sign, I guess. I don't know. But the nice thing is that we don't have to deal with any of that here. Yes. But there are still plenty of Minnesota Wild questions to get to, Joey. So I will defer. I'm going to sit in the question chair, and you can fire away any Wild-related questions you've been dying to know.
Yeah,
I'm an open book.
You got it. Buckle up. I have to ask you about John Hynes. I think the last time we spoke, I asked you about is there really a difference between him and Evason that you saw throughout the season? And you mentioned that there really wasn't much. So I am curious, what are you most looking forward to from John Hynes, and maybe any possible changes to identity this season? And what are you least looking forward to when it comes to John Hynes behind the bench?
I think we saw a subtle tweak in John Hynes, and Bill Guerin said as much when he brought Hynes in to replace Dean, that you're not going to get massive changes.
Yeah,
because they play similar styles. At the end of the day, the roster is still pretty much the same roster it was last year. But I think Hynes made one important change that has led to better results and has led to a nice uptick in offense, especially for the top level guys since he took over, is he just changed the philosophy for the Wild to stop trying to be a team that slows everybody down to playing more of the modern style. And, this really reflects in how quickly the Wild try, especially when the Wild, because of the style they played under Dean Evason, they tended to get caught on their own end of the ice a lot. And, it's like you jump into a hole that you yourself dug, but it's too deep and you can't crawl back out.
Yeah.
So Hynes has really prioritized trying to quickly move out of the zone, and push the puck up the ice. So when the other team does get set offensively, you have that in your head to where anytime you get the puck, like off a rebound or off a turnover, your first thought is, all right, let's flip this and move up the ice and get back into the offensive zone. And so even just that subtle tweak of trying to play more of a, quote, modern style, the Wild still, they need more speed and skill on the roster. Yeah. That's pretty evident. But by at least trying to kind of play with the same pace that NHL teams do, they don't get railroaded by the teams that are faster than them anymore, because they can kind of try to keep up a little bit. So I think that's been the biggest difference with Hynes that we saw. The other thing that I like is that he is way more prone to making in-game line adjustments than Dean ever was. Like, Dean was always 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, on and on. We've seen Hynes do some really interesting things with his line combinations, depending on where things are at in the game. Last night against Chicago, he flipped Marco Rossi and Ryan Hartman midway through the game, and the Rossi line scored 3 goals in the second period. Like, he seems like he has a much better beat on how the team is doing on a nightly basis. And, well, let's try this to see if we can't create some more chances. Ultimately, the thing that still is concerning to me is just that we haven't seen the playoff success yet. He has yet to win a postseason series in any of his previous stops, but neither has this Minnesota Wild team for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And so maybe a coach and a team with similar issues can come together and get past it together. Mm-hmm. But I do like the battle tactician stuff that he does in games, which is that's a pretty stark contrast to what Dean did when he was here.
Yeah, I think you can make some comparisons to what the Stars were under Rick Bowness compared to now with Pete DeBoer, where the Stars, they were very good defensively, mainly because they got really great goaltending. So they could hold on for dear life that Calgary series from a few years ago where Otter was just under siege, and the Stars somehow pushed that to 7 games, and they were clearly not the better team. But you look at it now, and yeah, Pete DeBoer wants to get the puck and go. Like, wingers fly the zone, because as long as you're not defending, that means that's a good thing, and you're going to give up less opportunities. Where do you see Minnesota finishing? I like them to get back in the postseason. I really do. I think Winnipeg's going to fall out. And I like the Wild's young core, and I know we're going to get into that here in a bit. And as long as they just don't get off to a horrific start like they did last year, and maybe you don't play Winnipeg a few too many times because they just like hurt everybody on Minnesota throughout the season. I think they have too much talent up front. Like Boldy and Kaprizov are so good. And Faber's great. A full year Spurgeon, you have to believe like they have a nice solid foundation. But there's things that have to go right. But that's like every season. You got to stay healthy and all this. But yeah, I like where do you kind of see them fit in the Central and maybe getting back in the postseason?
It is interesting because I think going into the year, because there just weren't as many changes, everybody expected that it was going to be a similar type of season this year as we had last year. But, there have been some intriguing little tweaks that I think could make a difference this year. You talked about Jared Spurgeon. Having him back this year, I think is going to be massive because not only for what he does on the ice, but also for the leadership stuff that just was sorely lacking through a majority of the season last year. So Jared Spurgeon being back is a big lift, both defensively and just to the team in general. I have been nothing but impressed with what we've seen from Yakov Trenin and Jacob Lauko. And I think that is reason for an improvement as well, because lines 2, 3, and 4, after we created the super line with Karil, Matt Boldy, and Joel Eriksson-Ek, lines 2, 3, and 4 were black holes last year for the final 2 months of the season. Like the entire fourth line, I think, combined for 15 total points from February to the end of the year last year.
Yeah.
Which is hideous.
It's just not going to get it done that way, especially in today's game.
Yeah. And so you bring in Lauko, who's got great speed, but he has been very vocal about he wants to improve his offense this year, and he has 3 goals in the postseason so far. Mm-hmm. So you bring in a guy like that. You bring in a guy in Yakov Trenin who can be your bulldog out there, takes a little pressure off of Marcus Foligno to do that. He's still going to do it, but he doesn't have to be the one doing all of it. If this Wild team can get consistent production from line 2, they will make the postseason. I can promise you that. They just have too much talent to have a year like they had last year.
Yeah.
If the injuries start to rack up again, that could be a problem. But if they can get a second line that can answer the bell with what Karil Kapriszov is, we know he's going to do, that'll be good enough to vault them in. And hey, I would be fully in favor of Winnipeg falling out. Jets fans, you know where to find me. I'd be fully in favor of them falling out of the postseason. And so we'll see. But honestly, like, I just have them right in the same area as St. Louis right now, just that tier below those top 4 teams. If the Wild are going to make the postseason, one of those 4 is going to have to fall out. I could very much see that happening.
Absolutely. I did want to ask you the last one, but you may have already answered it. But is Lauko your favorite young player that you've kind of seen? He was one of the ones that did stand out to me on Sunday. I was a bit harsh on the Wild, but I was like, this was unwatchable. I'm sorry, but they were unwatchable in the first 2 periods of it. I left before they scored because I'm like, okay, I thought it was going to be more competitive. And I know it wasn't their roster. It's not their roster, but I'm like, good night. It was really bad. But Lauko was one of the few Wild players that did stand out to me.
He's just a hilarious character. And I think this team kind of needs that. He is a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. He has a full sleeve of arm tattoos of all of his favorite Lord of the Rings characters.
Mhm.
But that game you mentioned, he was pretty vocal in, I think, the first intermission and saying, look, we know we don't have our regular guys in the lineup. That doesn't give us an excuse to just not show up. We gotta do stuff on the ice. That game was beyond unwatchable. And that was one of those where I was like, I know I'm not going to cover this because I'm not going to pull anything from it.
Yes.
He's been great. Honestly, another guy that I really sneakily like just because of the character that he brings to is his fourth line center, Marat Huznadinov, who last year he won 2 faceoffs in a row in his debut and got just a thunderous ovation from the fans. And he was asked about it in the postgame, and he's like, I heard people cheering, and I'm like, I won 2 faceoffs. Big deal.
Do that on the PK, man. You're a god in Minnesota.
he's gonna be a huge focal point of that unit too. And so I would say those guys. I tend to gravitate towards the fourth line guys because the hustle and the energy they bring on a nightly basis. And so no surprise that those are probably 2 of my favorites this year because they're on the fourth line.
Yeah. All right. Well, good stuff. Good stuff.
We are going to finish with a nice head-to-head look at what both of these teams have coming down the pipeline. We're seeing more of it with Dallas over these last couple of seasons. We will see more of it from Minnesota over the next few as well. And so we're going to dive in as to which team has the better chance and the better core to be able to hoist the cup. That's on the way as we finish today's crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars after this. Final segment of today's crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars. And once again, we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Make sure to ride with us throughout the course of the season because nobody has you covered better than Locked On. I promise you that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Joey, let's talk about the core because we have seen, I'm not talking about the Aaron Eckhart movie, of what I don't even know when that was made, where they go to the center of the earth.
Before my time, I'm a youngin', Seth.
It's like I have no idea what you're talking about. There was some movie called The Core where there were all these geostorms going on, and they had to burrow into the center of the earth and restart the Earth's core. It was equal parts of delight and equal parts. Yeah, this is a little too sci-fi for sci-fi, but
2003. So I was like 4. So it was a little too early, but you're right. Stanley Tucci was in it. All right.
Stanley Tucci, A+.
Great TikTok videos, eh?
Yeah. I follow the cooking. I follow the cooking videos, and I wish I could cook even half as good as he can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We've seen a little bit of this core more for Dallas than we have for Minnesota. And so I want you to just, you've got, like you said, Jason Robertson, who was kind of the trailblazer of this group that also now includes Rupe Hintz, Miro Heiskanen, Thomas Harley. Some of these other guys, Logan Stankoven especially, and Wyatt Johnston, how is it possible to have as much young, good talent as Dallas does? Has the contention window for this Stars team even truly opened, or once those guys really get going, are you guys just going to knock the door down?
Yeah, I hope so. It feels like the beginning of this new era of Dallas Stars hockey, which 5 years ago we thought was coming to an end. And it's funny that you bring this up because I did a segment on this just the other day on Locked On Stars on how Dallas really reinvented their way of drafting and developing young talent after that 2016-17 season, where a lot of teams would have just blown it up, right? But that's hard to do in Dallas. It's not the traditional hockey market. And there was a piece on The Athletic, and general manager Jim Nill said they really had to buckle down, and they changed their philosophy on drafting. They started drafting skill over size. And you mentioned how the Wild are starting to kind of figure that out as well, adapt the more modern style of game. And that landed you Logan Stankoven, Miro Heiskanen, which was a bit lucky. They had Anaheim's pick, so they got the 3rd overall pick. You draft him, you get Otter in that same draft. But then you start drafting guys in the late 1st round, even 2nd round, where they got Stankoven. Maverick Bourque, who seems to be the big breakout candidate this season for Dallas after winning the AHL MVP last season. And Stankoven, man, the game on Sunday against the Wild, you're just watching him and you're like, this guy's nothing to play for. He has nothing to play for. He's on the roster. We know what he provides, and he is just buzzing around, making Minnesota's life hell. And I'm just like, this guy's insane, and he's so good. And I said, he's that player, your buddy in practice back when you were growing up, and he's just 120% all the time. You're like trying to take it easy, like, oh, we have a game tomorrow, save the legs. And no, not Stankoven. He is going to make you pay, and he's going to dominate every single time he's on the sheet. He's going to have a big year. And I mean, what else can you say about Wyatt? He got 30 goals last year. At just 20 years of age, he looks like he's going to get to play on that top line with Robertson and Rope. That could be a dominant line in the NHL. Maybe it gets him back to what we saw for about a year and a half with Pav on that line. So it's just, this young core is exciting, and you've gotten a taste of Liam Bichsel as well. He's the new exciting big toy that the Stars have. He was, I think, an 18th overall pick a few seasons ago. He's 6'6". He's huge. He kind of gives me Victor Hedman vibes. And he's only 20 years old. He's only 20 years old, and he can move. He can shoot. He'll probably start the year in the AHL, but I think 3 months or so, and he's knocking on the door. So, I mean, Dallas has this good problem where it's like we don't have many roster spots at all, and we have like a ton of great talent. Because Bourque, I mean, in probably 30 other organizations would have been called up last year, but not in Dallas. Yeah, in cap space has to play in. But yeah, and as you can tell, like, I'm just geeked about all this young talent. It's a plethora. But yeah, it all dates back to Dallas sort of changing that philosophy. You got to get skill now. It's just the way the game is, and physicality. It still has a place in the game, but it's not as important as it once used to be.
Yeah, I'm firmly of the belief that you can find guys to plug into your bottom 6 to give you size and physicality. Mm-hmm. You can find those guys every trade deadline, or you can go sign one in free agency.
Yeah, like Colin Blackwell. Like, that's the guy the Stars got. Like, you can find those.
Yeah. Yakov Trenin in free agency.
Yes.
I don't know if I would have gone 4 years, but a point still stands. You can find those guys in free agency. What you can't find is top 6 elite level talent. Mm-hmm. To counter, I'm going to read to you the picks that the Minnesota Wild have made, in particular since Judd Brackett took over as the draft guru.
Okay.
Now, these weren't all his picks. Marco Rossi was before he got here, but I'm going to start with 2020 because it's, I think, more evident of what the Wild are doing with the type of players they're drafting. So 2020, they went Marco Rossi at 9. They drafted Murat Huznadinov in the 2nd round. They drafted Ryan O'Rourke in the 2nd round as well that year. 2021, Jesper Wallstedt and Carson Lambos in the 1st round. Jack Pert in the 2nd. 2022, Liam Ogren and Danila Yurov in the 1st round. Hunter Height and Rieger Lorenz in the 2nd. 2023, Charlie Strammel. Now, this was the one pick that kind of deviated from speed and skill.
Yeah, I know Strammel, he had a big year, right, in high school, because he's a Minnesota boy, isn't he? And kind of yeah. Okay.
He's had some injuries and some his dad died as he was going into college and just didn't play a ton in Wisconsin. He's going to Michigan State now, but I saw him at development camp, and that dude has filled out. Oh, my God.
I mean, he was pretty big in high school. I think I watched him at a state tournament. Was he Hill Murray? I may be completely off, and we were going somewhere else.
Boy. But
I couldn't remember, but I think I watched him. But yeah, I thought he was a pretty decently sized kid too. In high school, I couldn't quite remember. Maybe that was Strobel. That was.
It could be. Stramel's from Rosemont.
Okay.
But
Anyways.
anyway, he was the one deviation because then you draft Riley Heights in the second round that year. Now this year, I'm glad you talked about, kind of lucking into a pick because the Wild definitely did that this year with Zeev Buyam.
Yeah. God, he's such a good player.
I still can't believe it.
I said it. I watched him. I was at a UMD Denver series and I'm watching the game. I'm like, who the heck is this kid? I'm like, this is Quinn Hughes. That's my compare. I'm like, this is Quinn Hughes. Incredible talent. Anyway, yeah, huge get for them. What was it, 13th?
12th. They traded up to avoid having him get poached, which I fully endorse.
Yeah.
But you've seen the shift. Like the Wild have definitely shifted to drafting for speed and skill.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about all those players that Dallas has at their disposal coming up. The Wild have Liam Ogren, who is probably going to start the year in Iowa, but is going to be that first wave that we see over these next couple of years. Riley Heights will be on this team. I would be shocked if he's not within the next 2 years. Danila Yurov, who has top line upside, will be on the team next year. And so you're seeing the Wild too make draft decisions that better align with the modern type of game, which is when their contention window is going to open to. Like once these guys all get on the roster, that's when their contention window opens. And we're going to see the same thing that's happened with the Stars happen with the Wild, where, okay, we're starting to kind of move on from the old guard. Let's inject these young players in. And so if there's ever going to be a time for the Minnesota Wild to be cup contenders, it's going to be with some of these names on the roster.
And I would give Minnesota credit as well, because this was something Dallas did not do with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin. They could not build around them. Yes, they were really high quality players and they paid them a lot of money, rightfully so. But Ales Hemsky and Patrick Sharp were the big guys you brought in to bring around him. And now they've done it, but Ben and Seguin are in their mid-30s now, and they're still contributing, and they've had some nice resurgence. I mean, they're still really nice players. I mean, I think Jamie Benn's still going to produce at a very deep. I think he's a 60-point guy again, especially when you get to playing with Bork and Stankoven, just throw him with the young guys. But with Kapriszov, he's 26. Boldy's 22. As these players come up, then they fill around those players that are in the primes of their careers to get that window. So that I'll give Minnesota the edge there, where Dallas they took a while to do it. They've done it now, and hopefully they can get over the hump and get them a cup. But yeah, I mean, like Peart is a player in Buam, sort of similar. They're offensive style defensemen. I watched Peart at St. Cloud. Go Huskies, by the way. So it's you just have to. You have to now. And there's always going to be the big 6'6" defenseman during free agency that's going to get paid all the money because GMs can't help themselves sometimes, and there's a time and place. But it's nice that teams are embracing that now. And Dallas has put themselves in a position where they're kind of contenders every year, which is good. And barring injuries and crazy stuff, contracts and all that, like you have to think like the next 8 years, they can be like top 3 in the Central, depending, every season. And that's where Minnesota's trying to get, right? Because you don't want to be stuck where Dallas was for like a decade. It's like, well, we're on the bubble, like mediocrity, right? You don't want to be mediocre. That's just the worst place to be when you're stuck in the middle. And Dallas was able to revamp themselves. And yeah, maybe the Minnesota has done that now, which is exciting. Hey, don't mean to be rude, but let's make these games a little more competitive, Seth. Okay, the Stars have been kind of whomping them over the last few years. Let's make it a challenge, okay? We need some fun and animosity.
I don't need to do another post game after losing 8-3 to the Stars and giving up
by Murray
7 special teams goals. Yelling so loud in the post game that every other media person in the press box is like. But I like you see that once and you're like, I don't ever want to see that type of a game again.
Yeah.
But yet we've seen it like 8 times over the last 2 years, and so I'm No offense taken. I'm right in the same boat. Like,
Yeah.
let's just cut that nonsense out of the schedule entirely, because you should be having head-to-head tense games with your rivals in the division instead of getting your face kicked in. So that's my plea for this season. But I'm sure our paths will cross many times over the course of the year, and we'll see if Winnipeg does indeed fall out of the top 4.
Oh, they will.
We'll find out.
You got to watch our contenders episode we did. We were just all over. They were the punching bag. I felt so bad. But hey, they took it in good fun, and it was a good time. And I'm a Winnipeg hater at this point. I've kind of subscribed to that. So
yeah.
And as much as the Wild are a rival, I like to see them do well. I really do. And it makes it better for us too. Entertaining games, Wild Stars, nothing gets better. The animosity is already built in historically. So it's just great in general, but always a pleasure to talk with you, Seth. Anytime I can talk to a fellow Husky, it's a good damn day. So appreciate you having me on again.
Absolutely. Listeners, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any episodes like this as we move closer to the start of the season. Both Locked on Wild and Locked on Stars are keeping you up to date with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.